one of my favorite experiences in the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is a show you and I are familiar with.
Yeah, I think so.
Was the ability to work off of Darren Dunstan's performance as Maximilian Pegasus.
Oh, yes. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff. I mean, the comedic villain is always my favorite in any series we're working on, and Darren did a fantastic job with that one.
Yes, and I announced that we were recording today with him on social media, and one of the followers said he did this perfect Bond villain take. It was like meeting the final boss, and I was like, that's a really good way to
definitely
capture that.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then I got the pleasure of working with him on other shows, of course, at 4Kids, but we also did these David Ives one-act plays. We did a series of them, and we mounted that production twice, and I guess we were calling it 5 by Ives. And Darren was also part of that, so I got to know him in a much broader sense as a performer, as an actor, also as a musician. He's a very, very gifted piano player and just a really solid musical talent. And anyway, so and I had known him for several years, so it was kind of like getting to re-know somebody I thought I knew.
I think the fans are really going to enjoy hearing the range of talent that Darren possesses.
Yeah.
Once again, we bring people on where they're like, oh, I know him from this, but it's like, wait, let us show you a little bit more of who that person is, where they come from, and what inspired them. And I think this is going to be an interesting show.
Yeah, there's a bigger picture to everyone. Yeah. Well, what do you say?
I say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the Heart of the Cards, a conversation about creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt.
Hey, this is Dan Green.
And Eric Stuart.
And today we are joined by our friend and colleague, Darren Dunstan.
Welcome,
Darren.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So we've had some other guests, friends of yours, colleagues of yours as well, and we have been learning from our interviewing process with them sort of, the kinds of things that the listeners respond to and that sort of thing. And as we discussed with you, we have this format to some of the earlier episodes where we're talking about the hero's journey, so we can definitely, use that as a way to kick off some conversation.
Cool.
But as Eric was saying, it's really nice to get a chance to speak with you and get the fuller picture, and not just necessarily what you might hear at a panel at a convention. Nothing wrong with that, but
right.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and digging into it. So
I love that. I mean, it's always fun to chat with you guys, and sometimes we get the chance to within a session or professionally, or at a con, like you said. But this sort of scenario where we might dig deeper is pretty cool too. Make me cry. I want you to make me cry.
Okay, great.
That's more Eric's thing. But.
That's right. I'm the mean one.
No, you're not.
No.
The characters he portrays.
Yeah, that's right. I'm an actor. I think it's interesting. I think that Dan and I have really grown to know you pretty well, but from different perspectives too, like just because I also got to work with you behind the scenes a lot. But I think we should talk about some of the early times in your life, because I don't know too much about your call to adventure, where it all began and where the inspiration to pursue the arts came from. So,
gotcha.
If I would be so bold as to start the conversation, tell me about what your call to adventure was. When did you decide, how early on, that you had the bug to do what you do?
Yeah. I mean, there were pivots along the way, for sure. I come from a totally musical family. My parents are both classical musicians, and piano lessons from age 5 were non-negotiable, and my sister and I were definitely required to do that, and even in school, to join the choir and band and all that stuff. My sister was much more of an athlete, and so she, once she was let off the hook, she did her thing, and I stuck with it. So I knew that art was in my blood, and my parents were, although they're sort of conservative people, they're also very creative, excellent musicians as well. So that's it's kind of bred in you, right? What the first weird pivot was,
Right.
though, was like realizing that that the combination of music and theater was a thing. Like I remember my dad.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like my dad would, in his choirs at school or whatever, like they do like one from a chorus line, no choreography or anything, or like a medley
Sure.
that included
It's a great song.
yeah, something from Annie or Mame or I was so drawn to those songs, even though they weren't staged there. And so I kind of realized in high school, I went to an art school, that this combination of music and theater was just so powerful, and I had to be a part of that. So that was definitely, pivot number one, that this could be.
Wait, and how old do you remember yourself being?
I mean, I remember watching Cabaret, which was the grade 9, the musical, and I was in grade 9. And I wasn't in it, but I was like, holy crap, like that was eye-opening. So then starting with grade 10, did the musicals each year, and then actually pivoted back to classical music. Like both my parents and I agreed that it would be good to get like a good vocal training before I did anything else. So I went to undergrad for classical music.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Please correct me, Darren, if I'm wrong about this, but for all that early childhood background stuff, the audience should be imagining everyone speaking with a Canadian accent.
Yes, right? Yes. Where were you actually born and raised? I think that'll also give them a little bit better perspective of what we're talking about.
Yeah, the whole grade 9 thing that I said probably was a giveaway. Yeah, I was born and raised in Mississauga, Canada, which is the city right next to Toronto. So essentially grew up in Toronto.
Yeah.
Always lived in a big town, actually.
I have family in Toronto, and yeah, it's a lovely.
It's a great place, and my family's all still there, so I visit them often. And a great place. I sang in children's choirs and had really amazing opportunities with orchestras and stuff, and just a very cool, in retrospect, worldly kind of upbringing,
Right.
Which I'm so grateful for. Sort of a suburban life, but also just I am a city boy. From there to Boston to New York has kind of been the trajectory.
So with your parents being both musicians, and obviously you had no choice but to do that, which, as you said, did you feel that there was pressure to be at their level? Did you feel as a career choice that since they both were in that industry, or that it was sort of put forth that this is something you could do for a living, that or were they afraid that you would follow in their footsteps because of the challenge of it? Or were they like, no, this is what you need to do because we do it and we need you to be at the same level?
I think, that's a great question. I think they recognized my talent, and I was also kind of the pleaser, the easy child. So I think me wanting to be good for them, I think was part of it as I reflect upon my youth. Here's the part where I cry. Just kidding. But I think in a perfect world, my dad would have loved me to follow in his footsteps and be a high school musical teacher. So a very creative pursuit, but in a very controlled, pension-giving environment,
Right. So the conservative approach to the arts, I see what you're saying. Because my mother is a professor of dance, so she was. So same sort of thing. Don't take that extra risk of going out in the real world and trying to get those gigs, get the job, and also still follow your passion. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And I think what's even more interesting, if I may, like where I am now is kind of that. Like I did sort of pivot. I do some acting still, but I've definitely pivoted to directing, which again is like a more steady, leadership, teacher kind of
definitely.
position. So, all my family are teachers, and I think that was sort of my destiny in one way or another.
In your early years of performing, when you first got that first opportunity to step on stage, I like to ask our guests this because I'm always curious of how different people treat that first moment in that spotlight. Were you incredibly nervous to get on stage, or because maybe you were surrounded by musical performers in the family, you just thought, well, this is what people do? Or
Right.
can you remember that first moment?
Gosh, I can remember singing solos at like church as like a boy soprano, and it was that combination of terrifying and thrilling all at the same time.
Yep.
And in a very warm environment where, like, no matter how bad you are, there's people are going to compliment you because it's church.
That's true. That's true.
But there's also no getting around that sense of not wanting to fail and being afraid to, even though you're in a very warm and loving community, right? You just the idea of disappointing is so frightening.
And the older I've gotten, I've kind of pivoted away from singing. I miss it in some ways, but in a way, it sort of stresses me out more.
Really?
It really stresses
Because
me out.
you expect more of yourself, or
I want it to be flawless, and like if I crack, or if my resonance isn't perfect on that note, I get really down on myself, and it becomes just sort of a stressful event more than a pleasurable one.
That so happens to that's interesting. I was working with a student last night, and who was dealing with a little of this anxiety about being perfect, which I think is very common, with people who do what we do. And I without really thinking about it, I just reflected back to her. Perfectionism is only useful if you let yourself make mistakes. And I think there's the risk of, and other people have said that basically the same thing, like don't let perfection be the obstacle to the good, or this has been observed before, but that demand you put on yourself, you think of as being something that's going to make you do better,
right?
But it can very often make you do nothing.
It's very hard to step away from that technical perfection and realize that there are also beautiful mistakes. So many.
That was my best effort to try to make you cry, Darren.
Yeah. But I could understand that, especially coming from classically trained and musical theater and really having to be so
the expectation.
That's very interesting.
And you know what perfect is in that field.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, I remember Beverly Sills, that opera singer, saying that like in her career of 20, 30, 40 years that she sang a great, perfect show maybe 5 times, I think she said, out of her whole career.
Right.
So it's all perception, right? Like I'm sure she sounded incredible 99% of the time, but it wasn't perfect to her. And I think I'm also sort of a risk-averse person. I don't love to put myself out there or to be vulnerable for way to go into acting, right? Like where you're constantly.
That's why I said really.
But like it's not if I can shy away from something, or if I can turn the spotlight off of me, I will do that you see me at these like online con panels, like I'm dying for Wayne to crack a joke, or for us to pivot the conversation off of me as quickly as possible.
That's funny.
But let's talk more about me.
Yeah. Let's make it more uncomfortable.
Did you make that transition into any sort of non-musical stage acting early on in your high school years? Like, was that also something that you were interested in pursuing, where it didn't involve any music?
That's a good question too. Yeah. So in my last year of high school, I had completed the music arts program, so I was allowed to just pursue just the drama program, and that was really enlightening as well. And I remember even a couple times back then, and even a couple times, in my career, I've had 2 offers, and I've chosen the play over the musical, just for that reason. Like it's big, and there was opera involved in my undergrad, and like it was just, no offense to opera, but it just seemed such a more limiting form of drama and emotional experience that like I'm so much more drawn to the acting end of things than the music end of things. I mean, I think to toot my horn, but like I got good at the music stuff quickly. I can sight read really well. Like it's so much less interesting to me now. So
Right. And also you had also perfected the use of the instrument, right? You had been working so hard with all of your vocal stuff that I could only imagine when you finally were, in a non-musical piece, the fact that you could project, or you could bring us, like, you could control an instrument that a lot of people take a lot of time to learn how to develop. You had already done that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you guys find this. I'm sure you do. So many musicians are really good at voice acting, like the people I direct. They just get the
I've
cadence,
made that observation.
the pitches, they can control their voice, they can control the timbre of their voice. Like, they take
the timing, which is critical for the dubbing. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
People take really well to that, I find.
Yeah. I equate matching lip flap with, I'll say, hey, it's like listening to a song for the first time. If if chorus 1 and chorus 2 are the same, by the time chorus 2 comes around, I can sing along in time with it. I might not get every note right, but it's like lip flap. You show me the lip flap on something the first time, I know it. I learned it. Then just beat me in, and I'll nail it, because it's music. It's all about timing. So, yeah.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And making those moments feel like they're organic and alive and have a purpose all their own, and you're not just hitting the notes.
Did you do any dialect stuff when you were doing stage? Because, now we're leaning into a little bit more of, like, character stuff. Did you get a chance to do any of that?
A little bit. The occasional, like, I remember I did the musical Assassins, and I was John Wilkes Booth, who I think that was North Carolina he was from, or I forget. So, that involved the dialect. And then theater school. Like, I went to theater school in Boston, and weirdly enough, the very first show I did there was Cabaret, and I was the only there's only one American character in Cabaret, Cliff, and I was playing him, the only Canadian in the cast. So, and I just gotten there, so I think my accent was fairly prominent. So that in itself was a dialect exercise, just to get the Canadian out of it.
Well, it wasn't German, so at least it was different, right?
I would have preferred German, probably.
Well, American, but it can be harder to do a dialect that's similar to the one that you know. It might be easier to go from Canadian to German.
Right.
Totally.
Than
just
American.
to open those about, sorry.
Without
them sounding exaggerated. That was
a few of the A sounds.
The very first time I ever had to smoke or did smoke a cigarette was in that play. So,
interesting.
Yes, I did not enjoy that.
No.
Well, with the acting and the music, I wanted to make the comment, though, that part of what I think is appealing specifically about acting is, in comparison to all the other forms of creative expression, it's the most easily relatable as a human, right? I mean, because basically that's what you're being, a human being in a moment. And I think that is part of why it's so compelling, I think, to not just be in, but to observe. So
you can use your life moments to you can hash out your issues. And I definitely came from, like I said, a fairly conservative, a very loving home, but conservative. We kind of bottle up our emotions and use them sparingly.
Sure.
This opportunity to, like, dig deep and, like, burst into tears and remember that horrible thing that happened, blah, 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 like, was kind of cool.
Yeah, the cathartic element of it.
For sure.
And there's probably more ways to get through a scene through acting choices than there are variances on those notes you have to hit. Right?
True.
So that perfectionism standard isn't quite as rigid or specific.
So true. I remember in undergrad, going into the practice room, and every day I was trying to sort of teach myself to get like perfect pitch or relative pitch, and I just every day just going in, hitting a B flat, and doing the same freaking exercises over and over again. Like, no wonder I pivoted. It's like it's only so long you can do that before you want to yell.
It's a very demanding discipline. I have so much respect for people who we had a concert that my kids are going from 5th grade into 6th grade. So anyway, at the end of the year, and the featured violinist, this young, 11, 12-year-old girl, phenomenal. Huh. I mean, just amazing what she's been able to accomplish in that time. And I just thought, good Lord, how long
Right.
Has she been practicing?
Right. I think it's good.
It's
I mean,
really
I'm
remarkable.
not a parent, so it's not my business. But like,
Sure.
and
And it depends on the individual, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and in retrospect, I'm glad I was forced to do something. You know, I mean,
Right. Right.
You know,
Builds character.
yes, even things I sucked at, like you're going to try soccer for a year and then you're going to score on the wrong goal.
Well, but you wouldn't know if you didn't.
Did you?
I did.
Yeah.
You scored on the wrong goal?
Oh yeah, my mom still brings it up.
Yeah, nice.
And now our listeners will be able to pick it up at conventions.
It made the front page news in the Toronto Times.
The Mississauga News.
Musical prodigy sucks at soccer.
Hangs up his cleats and puts on his tap shoes.
There you go. It's a success story.
That's awesome.
So, all right. So, what was the next pivot? What did you, after you finished all of this and you're in school and you said, okay, well now, what did you do next?
Yeah.
Did you decide you were going to pursue the stage acting? Did you say were you still in music mode? What was chapter 2?
Right. I think as you know, as undergrad was closing, finishing sort of my classical / opera type stuff, like I knew A, that I wanted to pursue a musical theater degree, and B, I wanted to go to the States, to go to America.
Yeah.
And so I searched out schools and what I had the requirements to get into, and I applied to 3 different musical theater schools, and actually ended up only doing the auditions for 2 of them. Couldn't do the third one. Anyways, and so Boston Conservatory was my favorite, and I was accepted to there. So then it was musical theater time.
Nice.
It was and the expectation there is that you do your degree and then you move to the big city to do Broadway. And so that was the goal. So in 2000 I moved to New York City, and and then the next pivot began into this crazy voiceover world, which was completely unexpected to me and to everybody, for sure.
Yeah, to me too.
Now, did I first meet you in the booth, or did I first meet you at Radio City when you were doing the live show?
Yes. So my first gig out of college was the national tour of Pokemon Live. So it was the live
and you played
version.
Giovanni. You played Giovanni.
I did. Yeah. I was walking in Ted Lewis's shoes, trying to be the bad guy. So they'd written this full-scale, like 2+ hour musical based on the cartoon, and I remember, I met you and Veronica and the whole original. Oh, Dan, were you there?
I don't think so. No.
You lucky guy.
I should say that more firmly. I know I was not there.
Well, whatever people thought about the show itself, like the people, the cast, very talented people. I mean,
yes,
with you
sure.
and Andrew Reynolds and I thought the songs were fun. It was really cool. It was cool to see versions of the characters we were voicing in live action.
That must have been so trippy for you, and even
like when I met Andrew, because Andrew was James from Team Rocket, and when I got to meet him, he was like, "Hey, I'm a big fan of yours," and I'm like, "I'm a big fan of yours because you are me."
Right?
It was
he's stealing your bits.
Yeah, exactly. But so I did first meet you at the live show, and then you came into do ADR.
Yeah,
yes,
and that's pivot number 12, where the show was closing, and one of the producers of the show was 4Kids, which was producing Pokemon and about to acquire this brand new show. And so Norman Grossfeld, the president of that company at the time, asked me if I wanted to audition. And I think a handful of us from the live show came and read for this new show, Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I knew nothing about. I'm sure someone was like, "Oh, it's kind of like Pokemon," you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know what the lead in was. And Eric, you were there, so at least I knew a face, and you were directing and auditioning me. And it wasn't like these life moments where at the time you're like, yeah, it's an audition. I have no idea what I'm doing. Let's just give it a shot, and then cut to 23 years later.
Yeah, and you're still
Yeah.
and you're still in your early 20s at that point.
Yeah, I mean that was
Right.
2001. I probably
Once you're
auditioned.
24,
Yeah.
23, 24.
So I was born in 76, so I'm not good with the math. So
I was told there'd be no math, so don't ask me.
25. I must have been 25.
25, there you go.
And you were also very honest
Yeah.
about how green you were in that
Good.
world. Like you were, I seem to remember that audition, and it was like, I've never done anything like this. Is not what I do. But I think we
Yeah.
talked a little bit about that. Like, I knew you were a singer because I just seen you on stage.
Huh.
I remember that whole process, and
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it made sense though. It also like you understood the character.
Yeah.
Dubbing to lip flap was new, but it wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't like, what am I going to do with this guy?
But I appreciate you so much for that, because I know what it's like to you work with talent who is from a totally different genre, if you will, and have to sort of like wait for them to acquire the skills to dub.
Yeah.
So that you were that patient was
Well, thank you.
amazing.
I do think because you obviously I thought you were talented, but also I knew you were a musician, and that was giving me faith that even if he doesn't get it in the first couple of tries, he's going to start understanding the tempo of it. He's going to start being able to use his voice the way that we're trying to change inflection, this and that.
Right.
That made things like that gives you patience as a director when you know that the tools are there. Right.
Was most of the rest of your cast they had done, like, Dan, you dubbed before, like?
He had.
I'd been dubbing for years
yeah.
before Yu-Gi-Oh
Yeah,
came around.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we knew each other. We'd never really like hung out. We knew each other. We were friendly.
But yeah.
But that whole crew of guys and gals they were people that had pretty much worked on other things in the past. So there weren't a lot of new people in that first couple of seasons, I think,
Right.
when we were trying to launch it. I think it goes to say that when you have a show like that, you've just come off the success of Pokemon, and you're like, well, here's the next show. I'm sure everyone wants to see us fail. You also want to stack the deck by saying, well, let's just bring in the people that we know can do this stuff well, so that's not a
Right.
weak link. So
Right.
And there's also, of course, the timetable too. I mean,
yes,
Uh-huh.
there was that. There was that.
So, speaking of these challenges of learning new things and transforming your creativity to fit into the opportunities that are provided, there's this classic element of the hero's journey, often referred to as the trials, which is pretty self-explanatory. So. It doesn't have to be specific to 4Kids or dubbing. You can take a longer view of this idea. But what were or are some of the things that you consider to be those moments where you were challenged, you had to dig deeper? It could be anything from a specific situation or just a more general
Right.
elements within yourself. However you want to answer that.
Yeah, two things come to mind, and the first one is just that I decided to pursue a career that is maybe not completely suited to my personality. The riskiness of being a struggling actor in New York and not having family or connections and having to sort of forge all of that from scratch. In retrospect, you're young. I was 25? Did we decide? And you're young and stupid enough just to do it. But in retrospect, it's like that was so not my personality. Like I think I've eventually forged a career that is a nice balance of my personality. There are creative elements to the directing and the occasional acting that I do. The auditions I do, I feel good about, and I actually enjoy, laying down. And then the directing appeals to my organized kind of nature, the leadership nature, the job consistency element,
Right.
So it's I'm really grateful that I've found that balance.
So the hardest thing was allowing yourself to take such a risk to begin with.
And I think the road back from that too, to realize like, okay, this might be too risky for me. You know, it's
Right.
it's when people move their investments from like high risk stuff to moderate. It's knowing like when you need to do that and the timing of it. And you know, I think it was luckily I was presented with the opportunity to direct. I think, Eric, you were part of that, where they were acquiring more shows at 4Kids and they needed people to try to direct. So you know, I don't know if you threw my name out, Eric, or what, but thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, I don't want to just pat myself on the back for that, but there's definitely some people that have continued to work in this industry that I am flattered that they recognize, like, yeah, you know, I did have a little bit of pull with certain things because I think I had established myself to a place, to a degree where people sort of trusted my opinion on those kinds of decisions. So,
Right.
yeah. And you had sat in with me and,
Yeah.
you know, they were like, you know, like, try these people out. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Right.
But yeah,
I've-
it's interesting that you went from a different country, this very risky business, go to school in a different country, move to 2 big cities, and then, yes, you tried the risk and then fell into that sort of balance,
Right.
but without the regret of never trying the risk.
Right. And it's always still there too, you know, like I think, you know, maybe I will want to pivot back to theater like I just got new headshots done. In the back of my brain it's like, oh, maybe I should have one for if I get sent in for, you know, an on-camera this or for musical this and yeah, it's there. You can always pursue it and it's almost like it's almost like rebirth, the fact that like I'm a different type now 20 years later. Like I'm not going to be Anthony in Sweeney Todd. I'm going to be Sweeney, or in 5 seconds I'm going to be the judge, you know, like TikTok. Time is going fast, but and then there's one other thing, if I can mention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm still making discoveries about this, and it's being a gay man, a gay person, part of the LGBTQ community, and how one finds their way in that, through that, and also how the business has evolved. I think in a great way to welcome that, or to be more open-minded to that. I remember when in theater school, which is, you know, chock full of gay men who are, you know,
Yeah,
because
that's not not just a stereotype or a cliche.
No, it's just facts, you know. And yet back then, you know, it wasn't overtly said to us, but it was definitely implied that, like, sure, you could play Hedwig and you could play, you know, a couple other roles, but if you want to be Billy Bigelow, you got to butch it up, you know, like, again, it wasn't said in that clear-cut way, but we knew, and you know, part of taking on a role is to fall into that character, and so okay, there's that element of it, but you know, it was kind of understood that there weren't a lot of roles for people who
for you as you are, without having to
you
portray
weren't
some
reflected
masculine
on
stereotypes.
stage nearly as much, and that's changed a lot, and it's even changed in cartoons. You know, like I think, you know, yes, Pegasus had a wife and all that, but like I think he was, you know. We never discussed this, but you know, he was fancy, fluid to some degree, or you know, like that's the way I played him with that in mind, and like,
Sure.
And so that was what, 20 years ago. There are other characters in cartoons that do seem to have sort of a gay flair to them, and again, I'm generalizing. The great pivot, and I feel like where we have made progress, is that they're not all villains anymore. So often, you know, the villain is this sort of flamboyant gay man, and it's nice to know that, like, audition sides I get now, any of the characters could be, you know, anything, gender fluid, non-binary, you know, quote antagonists, protagonists, even commercial VO auditions. Like the progress I think I've made with myself is to apply me to these things. Even to read a Dunkin' Donuts audition, I don't need to be I don't need to have a masculine, quote, baritone deep approach. I can be me. And I'm going to be me. And maybe that's not exactly, what they're after, but like it's going to be the most successful, purest form of what I have to offer.
Sure, it's organic.
That's a great way to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a production.
And we're starting to see that. Yeah.
And to see this maturing approach to just, understanding people as people and not as some sort of code of society that we think of as traditional is refreshing.
Right.
I did a production of Angels in America back when I still looked like a leading man, and I played Joe Pitt, who is a character who is in denial about his sexuality. I remember Bob Moss, the director, said, and this was like late 90s. And he said that the biases and attitudes and prejudices and the closeting behavior and all that stuff was so much worse like 20 years ago. Like, so for them, the 90s was evidence of progress, and it's only gotten more so. I mean, still in the 90s, there weren't that many quote unquote gay plays.
No.
That was sort of happening also because of the AIDS situation. That was something that was just beginning to be dealt with in plays and in artistic expression, in the wide form.
It would be nice. It would be nice though if it wasn't. I still see the backlash of when you do try to cast a gay man playing a heterosexual love interest in a romantic comedy. You get the people going, but that doesn't make sense. He's gay in real life. Why he can't play this role? It's like
so wrong.
Yeah,
it's so wrong.
It's so silly. We still see that, but I hear what you're saying, Darren, in terms of the shift, especially in the cartoons, and I'm hoping maybe it's this sort of like utopian approach to the world, but I'm hoping that it doesn't have to be like, okay, this is the gay character of the group, or it's just that's Bob, or this is it's just
right.
I don't need to tell you I'm the heterosexual lead. It's like
right.
That doesn't have to be the definition of the character. But do you think though, with you bringing that up, do you think initially you were brought in to audition for Pegasus by those people that had seen you and knew you from the stage stuff because they sensed you could play that character?
I think they brought me in because I was the villain in Pokemon, and let's have him read for the villain in
It was very linear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were typecasting you. They were typecasting you just as the villain.
Like
right?
He's a horrible human being.
Right.
And Giovanni had a female love interest in the show and that sort of thing. So like, I totally got why they brought me in, because there's a similar flair to both of them. There's a condescending upper class sort of
a sophistication
vibe.
Yeah.
And the comedic element. I think they'd seen me do funny stuff, and you all knew that Pegasus needed to bring some sort of levity to the show. So.
Oh yes, and that's another thing, is that your comedy you're so quick-witted. As you said, your upbringing a little bit more the conservative side, but your comedy is so broad. Like you're very. I mean, even just the references, the movie references, the TV stuff, the understanding of that. I mean, I love the fact that working with you and working with a lot of the people on these shows, they understand that Borscht Belt comedy. Because there's nothing new. It's like if you have to explain those jokes to people, like we're lost.
Right.
Even just the fact that you are such a Golden Girls fan, right? Like that to me. That's all you need to tell me. Like, if that's what you're watching, then I'm going to love working with you because you get it.
It's code. I said this in an interview recently. We're like, there's not a single day that I don't think about parallel a real life moment with what happened on a Golden Girls episode, or say some sort of line that is actually from a Golden Girls episode. It's just sort of my code, and other things I think I learned from you all. I remember, like through the cartoon experience, someone would mention like Peter Lorre, and I'd be like, well, who the hell is that? And Maddie Blaustein would have all these old like
every reference,
like,
every reference,
40s,
Yeah.
and it forced me to sort of like I had a lot of movie history under my belt, but like to find out who all these stock characters are, and
Maddie was a little older than us and had a slightly deeper reference. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anytime you asked her to do something, it would be like she would reference like that character that had 5 lines in a movie in 1952.
Right.
You'd be like, oh, sure. And of course, I would be the one who would go like, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Or she'd be like, this track is Groucho. The next take's going to be Harpo. And I'm like, okay. As long as you say the right words.
Hey, guys. Right. I would love to keep talking, which we're going to do in part 2. But for today, I think this is a great place for us to take a little break for part 1.
Yep.
And and in part 2, we'll continue getting Darren to share with us some of his journey, and we got a couple of classic things in the hero's journey to ask him to reflect on.
Love that.
But okay, awesome. Well. Thanks to Eric for being here. Always a wonderful contribution to the conversation. And most especially, Darren, thanks to you for making the time to come talk to us today.
Thank you. I could chat endlessly with you two.
Well, thank you for being a friend.
Well played.
Thank you so much. And thanks also, most especially to our listeners and followers who are joining us every week. And also, we love having those comments on YouTube, on AndromedaProductions.com. Very lovely and insightful things are often shared there. If you're not a part of that conversation, you're depriving yourself of some wonderful feedback from our insightful and talented fans. And I hope that we continue to deliver on the promise that every time you listen to an episode of The Heart of the Cards, you can count on a conversation about creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of the Cards with Dan Green and Eric Stuart. We hope this conversation in some way spoke to you. Whatever your journey, we look forward to crossing paths again in the next episode. This is Veronica Taylor, and on behalf of Andromeda Productions, we wish you well.
Andromeda, always a sound choice.